It was a few years ago. I was working in Kokomo refugee camp. Sanivation was doing some of its first pilots, and it was difficult. It was just I and my co-founder Andrew running 30 different container-based toilets at different households, where we were collecting the waste twice a week. We were treating it. We were also transforming it into a solid biomass fuel, a charcoal substitute that we were selling. And meanwhile, we were doing all the lab tests to prove the efficacy as well. It was one particular day that was really hard because Andrew was homesick, so I was doing twice the amount of work. And usually I'm back to the compound by 1 for lunch after having started at 7 a.m. But this particular day, I didn't even leave the lab until 2 p.m. And as I was leaving, I thought I'd stop by our treatment site to see how things were going. And they weren't going at all. In fact, all of the staff was gone except for the site manager, Hassan. And I asked Hassan, I said, where is everyone? And the normal excuses of someone's in the hospital and someone's at the police office and someone's finding their goats. And I was so upset because none of the waste had been treated that day. And so as I'm yelling at Hassan, I convince him of let's start loading up the feces ourselves. And so we were taking these barrels and loading them onto the treatment systems. And by the second barrel, we lifted it up and the latch on the barrel had come undone. And so sure enough, the lid came off and I was doused in fresh human feces from head to toe. And you can imagine how disgusting it was, but only add to it that it was about 105 degrees in temperature. It was the middle of the desert, so it was dusty. And oh yeah, the water's turned off in the afternoon. And so as I'm standing there just covered in feces, Hassan is just stark white in the face, this Somali refugee, and paralyzed with fear because I'd already been upset with him. And in that moment when there's nothing else to do, I started laughing. And it was interesting to see Hassan start coming out of this paralyzed fear and start awkwardly chuckling as well. Yeah, funny. And in that moment, you could see an aha in his head. And he ran off and he came back with a shovel. But it was actually really smart because then he started digging in the ground and he started throwing this dirt on my body, which oddly enough started coagulating the feces. He then used that same same shovel to start scraping the feces off my body. At Sanivation, we're working to create a world where everyone has access to safe and dignified sanitation through partnering with utilities to create cost-effective sanitation services. The reality is that utilities around the world are struggling with rapid urbanization. Traditional sanitation infrastructure requires extensive sewer networks and wastewater treatment plants that are just too expensive for the majority of emerging markets. Therefore, 60% of the world's population live in communities that don't have access to safely sanitation. And here in Kenya, utilities are they're soliciting for PPPs to help solve the solution. So what is Sanivation doing? Well, we're changing the way that we think about human feces. Because if you see it as only a waste product, then you're going to spend a lot of money just trying to get rid of it. But if you instead see it for the potential value and the potential reuse materials you can make, you can actually create secondary revenue streams to offset the cost of safely managing it. So currently Sanivation has 2 factories, and we're proudly opening a 3rd today on World Toilet Day of 2018. These factories not only take in human waste and treat it, they transform it into a solid biomass fuel, a charcoal and firewood substitute that we then sell as that secondary revenue stream to offset the cost of safely managing it. Therefore, our factories actually make money. Let me say it again. We have treatment plants that have already demonstrated a 55% gross margin positive. Treatment plants that make money. And beyond that, the fuel that we're creating not only burns twice as long as local charcoal, it has 1/3 the emissions, and for every ton that we sell, we actually save 88 trees here in Kenya. The impacts of our work are outstanding. Not only are we employing 75 people and creating a livelihood, we're actually giving 20,000 people safely managed sanitation. And we've removed over 100 tons of human feces from the communities, which research shows is up to a 47% reduction in diarrheal disease. And beyond all that, the 600 tons of fuel that we've sold this year has saved over 65,000 trees in Kenya. The hardest part that Sanivation's had to date is just changing people's perspective and how they think about sanitation. To date, the only solutions have been flush toilets, to sewer networks, to wastewater treatment plants that are just too difficult for places like here to do. And so to get them to think outside of the box, to think of new solutions, has been a difficult journey. And that's why we're so excited that today, our new factory that we're opening here in Naivasha, Kenya, is in partnership with the county government of Nakuru. And together, we're creating a factory that's going to treat over 100 tons of feces a month and going to convert that into this new solid fuel that's going to it's going to help curb deforestation here in Kenya. And so this perspective, I understand that sometimes the state of sanitation is so scary that you stand there paralyzed by fear. But if we can shift that perspective, and if we can start celebrating new innovations and new solutions, then the problem with sanitation and the state of sanitation in the world is gonna change. So on today, World Toilet Day 2018, join with me in celebrating the new innovations and the new future of what sanitation could be.